Hey there, welcome to episode 29 of the Quaggling Sand audio program. I'm your host, Dan Hugo, recording this on the morning of May 29, 2024. Happy Wednesday, whenever you're listening to this. Today, we're going to speak about a rather interesting, moment in my education and career nexus. That time I built big Homebuilt speakers. Episode 29 already. Wow. Coming along. Wherever you found this audio program, hopefully you are able to see the show notes in the description of the episode. You'll see my name as the host, a summary, which I'm about to read, and some links. Only three links today. 2 of the usual and 1 book link. So the summary of today's episode. Nowadays, they speak back to you, sometimes at inopportune moments. But back in the day, a long time ago, speakers were just speakers, playing the sounds we gave them. A little practical engineering project in college was actually quite an education, technical and otherwise. The links for today's episode, the 2 normal shameless self-promotion links, one to buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo. I use it as sort of a link tree, but it's a profile page, so I can throw in some links about my GitHub projects and my favorite coffee beans, my various audio programs, and there will probably be a few more things added. I keep saying that, but I really should describe more of my projects that I'm working on so that it's not just someday, one day in the future, maybe, but the army of one. Everything moves at one person pace, but that is one place where I will announce such things. Excuse me. Try that again. That is one place where I will announce such things, and you are under no obligation to buy me a coffee, despite the name of the website. It is not a site I have to manage or maintain, the site itself. So it's a nice place to point to so that you can find the various things that I'm working on. When new websites launch someday, they'll be linked there. If I add another audio program, if we add video, etc., etc. So things will appear there or at the ko-fi.com, ko-fi.com/DanHugo site, which will probably be more announcements, which I've been saying also for too long. So shameless self-promotion, by the way. You're under no obligation to purchase any coffees, but if you would like to support any of the projects that I'm working on, all of them are powered by coffee in some way. Some of them are powered by money also. But you can support any of the efforts that you hear described or any references to or so on and so forth through either of those. Now, if you do happen to check out the Innovate for Vegas stuff, that is an actual 501c3. You can actually make tax-deductible donations and so on. So that's a kind of an outlier in this collection of things I'm working on. But otherwise, in general, coffee's always good, especially when I make it. The third one is a relevant link, although the particular book I'm pointing to is it's an older edition. So this one you'd buy used if you can find it. I've seen it anywhere from $18 to $30, but you can get the new one, which I think is $30. It's the Loudspeaker Design Cookbook. So I have an Amazon link there, not an affiliate link. So if you happen to make a purchase, if you happen to buy and purchase mixed together, something. If you happen to pick that book up, I will know nothing and I will benefit in no way other than knowing that you found this useful, a discussion today. So let's get started. I was off to college in 1989. And when I arrived at Harvey Mudd College in August, and I will say when I took a tour of the campus the previous year, or was it? It might have been still 1989, but it was during my senior year, came by the Mudd campus, took a wandering around. I did see outdoor speakers, so I was not completely surprised. But when I arrived at Harvey Mudd College, I noticed that our little dorm called West, the first thing I noticed there was the number of speakers people had outside. Now I saw them when I took a tour, but I I was taking in a lot of new things. So I wasn't living in a particular dorm. So just noticing, oh, a lot of speakers, can hear some music. Okay. But now that I was living in West Dorm, moving in, there were a lot of outdoor speakers, not dozens, but I'm going to say like 2, 4, maybe eight speakers. So 4 pair at least. That's more than you would see on a typical street. It's more than you may have seen in your day-to-day up until arriving in a college like this. Now, our dorms were the quad dorms, north, south, east, west, are U-shaped cinder block monstrosities. So they are very solid, and they do reflect certain tones better than others. But I would be living in the fishbowl. So if you can imagine a U-shaped building, we had 88 residents. So not a ginormous 2-story U-shaped building. I was in the bottom of the U, so our windows were facing to the north and into the inner part of the U. So the courtyard, as we call it. So concrete, some bushes. Great place for some speakers eventually. So our door was in a hallway in the back hall, which would be the bottom of the U. It's a square U, but so if you can visualize all that, there were speakers up at the northwest part of the U. So, if I'm looking out the window in the upper left upstairs, that's where the atomic suite, subatomic was below it. See what they did there. On the northeast side, at that tip of the U, was heaven and hell. Heaven upstairs, hell downstairs, as you might imagine. And there were some other places here and there. Some people would put their speakers out and then bring them back in. So there were more than the speakers I mentioned, but some people just had outdoor speakers, and it was atomic bar that probably had. Well, that was the most inspirational. So if you have outdoor speakers and they're done well, like you've built them yourself, you can always buy. One person had an Altec Lansing PA speaker, so it's electrically suspended. It can be very loud. There's not really a lot of tone. They don't sound great. They just sound loud. They didn't sound bad, but they didn't sound great. So home-built, tuned, lovingly assembled, measured, tuned again, etc. You can do some good stuff. And more than once on a Friday afternoon, there would be loud music, to say the least. Probably one of the most memorable was the Mount Baldy earthquake. And that's probably a whole nother story on its own too. I was in chemistry lab on second floor or third floor. I think it was second floor. Not on the ground floor. So there was some space for the whole building to rattle a little bit. And so in chemistry lab, I had quite literally leaned back against the lab bench and the earthquake hit. So I'll save that for another time, but good time. So we wandered back to the dorms. Classes were canceled. Got to the dorms, and Atomic was playing REM's "It's the End of the World," or is it "I Feel Fine"? But it's the end of the world as we know it. They had hard hats on. They had already started mixing margaritas, probably. So good thing to do on whatever day that was. So anyway, having some outdoor speakers was part of the culture, part of the kind of, it's the end of the week, got to get started on the weekend homework. So somewhere in there you could play some music. Shooting hockey pucks was very popular. So one of my nobody had camera phones back then. So it's one of those memories I will just have to keep for myself. Was, if you're familiar with the Blues Brothers, there's the brass intro tone, I guess, the intro music they're playing before the Blues Brothers get up on stage at the end of the movie. And so someone was playing, it's from a Briefcase Full of Blues, and that. So someone was playing that. I think it was looped. And during orientation week, so this is the first week of my freshman year at Harvey Mudd College, they had a big welcome to the 5 colleges picnic thing, and everybody got Frisbees. So everybody, and Frisbee golf was very popular. So everybody was like, "Oh, Frisbees." So everybody grabbed a bunch. They all came back to the dorm, and then it became a big Frisbee fest. So I mentioned it's a U-shaped dorm. Why? U-shaped dorm. So people were throwing Frisbees. People got up on the roof. People on the second floor, first floor, throwing Frisbees all over the place while this music is playing. So you just see almost like The Birds, the Hitchcock movie, but Frisbees all over the place. Could have been menacing if they were actually sentient, but yeah. So that was a nice time to have this soundtrack for the goings on in West Dorm. So that was college, and again the speakers at Atomic, which were Homebuilt. I mean, nothing's wrong with purchasing some speakers. One of my fellow West Dormers had some very loud. What were they? I think they were Bose. Can't remember if they were Bose, but they were expensive 15-inch woofers, very nicely designed, very heavy. So those were good, but there's something to be said about building your own. So I was quite impressed with the speakers at Atomic. So I got to know Tim Radzik, who had built these speakers, physics major, of course, very into acoustics, which is an interesting field in general. So I said, "Hey, how do you build these?" And he was very helpful. He pointed me to the loudspeaker design cookbook. He gave me some places to shop for some parts. And so it was, it's good. It's always nice to, I mean, we were living in a dorm. There were 87 other people to interact with. So if you are in such an environment, it's probably a good idea to be helpful, but that was Tim's nature anyway. So that worked out nicely. And although occasionally he would say like, yeah, everybody's building speakers. Remember how I built mine first? I don't know if I think he was about half serious, because he, on the one hand, he was completely helpful. He didn't put anybody down for building speakers. He wasn't like, "Oh, mine are better," but he was like, "Hey, don't forget I kind of started this," which I don't believe anyone did. I think Tim Radzik will go down with a certain amount of infamy, at least for that window of time. So what do you get, like a 7-year legacy in that circumstance? So the MFLs, I believe it was the L stands for loud. They would shake the dorm and the surrounding neighborhoods and probably beyond. Probably parts of Los Angeles 30 miles away were saying, what are they playing over there? There was an evening, Tim's roommate, suite mate, was Eric. Eric was in the lounge, and he said, for no reason, "It's time for fusion." And he ran up to Atomic and put on an infamous track from Don Dorsey's Bachbusters, which Don Dorsey uses authentic period synthesizers to quite literally drop all the way down, probably almost certainly subsonic, down to 20 hertz, with building, rattling bass, but playing Beethoven's Ninth, the Toccata, the Fugue. So yeah, these were shaking buildings that were made of cinder block in the 50s. Like, things were probably, how is this building still standing? So that was sort of inspirational. This was my freshman year. So we had the briefcase full of blues with the Frisbees. We had the fusion. Every once in a while they would play things like, what is it? From Miracle Mile. What is it? The Miracle Mile. The whole soundtrack was by this artist. I'm gonna pause and look it up. All right, I can't believe I forgot it, but it was definitely not going to come to me. It was Tangerine Dream. So Tangerine Dream music, occasionally Enya, classical music in general, but also your selection of they would play rap music every once in a while, so some nice bass there. So generally speaking, the speakers that Tim had built, did quite well across a variety of different musical types, bass heavy, clear, and melodic, and so on. So they were pretty good, but it was it was fun, or it was sort of a part of the character to have music playing outside. This would be a frequent comment when there were campus tours that, the one music dorm. So it was generally appreciated. People would sometimes play some offensive music, but that's fine too. I mean, they're always just words. I'll get to that in a second. So the speakers themselves, they were split. So there was an upper cabinet with a bass driver and an Audax mid-range, and I believe he had a ribbon tweeter, and then the bottom cabinet had just one bass driver, 12-inch. So we had two of those, so 4 bass drivers, 4 cabinets. They would have a storied life on their own. They would move around, sometimes without permission. But they did have a legacy of their own. And so that's not a whole other story, but because I don't know most of it. I just know that they would disappear for a while and come back, depending on who was playing what music too much. They figured into the Noisy Minutes, which is an entire episode on its own. Noisy Minutes, a brilliant tradition during quiet hours during finals week each semester. So this is a good time to have some nice outdoor speakers, or speakers in general that you've built, that you have confidence in, some nice amplifier equipment. This is when CDs ruled the world, so everybody had their multiple hundreds of CD collections. Good time. So I said, I'm going to build some speakers over the summer, come back sophomore year, have some nice speakers. So on Tim's advice, I purchased some drivers. I had 4 12-inch dual voice coil speakers. I was going for Tim's basic design, although bass reflex cabinets without unusual porting, internal transmission line porting, you aren't really going to go too crazy. It's just going to be a box. So you could have non-parallel walls inside. You can do golden ratio. You can do all kinds of sort of standard things that you probably will find, especially in the latest edition of that book, the Loudspeaker Design Cookbook. But this book went over, so you get the Thiel small parameters. So if you're shopping for drivers someday, you'll find a free air resonance, and you'll find a response curve. So you'll know how the driver will perform over different frequency ranges, different bands of your 20 to 20K audible range. So I got these drivers. I got a bunch of particle board. I had a friend who, her dad was a woodworker of sorts. He had some basic woodworking equipment. So we got some 3/4 inch particle board, which you can purchase from your local hardware store, probably in 4 foot by 8 foot sheets, 4 foot by 8 foot sheets. And you can cut them down to size, which I did. And so I ended up with these 2 cabinets. They were 1-piece cabinets instead of 2-piece. So I had 2 speaker cabinets, 2 12-inch drivers in each. The mistake I made, because I didn't know any better, was that I had one giant volume for the 2 woofers. So this would cause problems, sort of. It was not an optimal design. So I built them at my friend's house. We transported them with one of my roommates that was going into sophomore year. So we did a big roommate, rejiggering. And so one of my roommates was coming down from Broomfield, Colorado. So they, instead of going straight to Claremont, they detoured through Phoenix, and I was already in Claremont. So they drove through Phoenix with their trailer. Because it was 2 brothers that were attending. So they had 2 brothers worth of stuff. So they had a trailer. They had some room for some speakers. They stopped by my friend's house, picked them up, drove to Claremont, and then we all kind of shared the load as far as getting amplifiers and CDs and equalizers and all the nerdy equipment. So at the end of the day, we had a nice outdoor speaker setup for our sophomore year. So good times. Unfortunately, this is my first design ever. So my design choices for the first pass were not great. Like I said, 1 big volume. So there was, you're basically interfering with across the bass driver. So they're both compressing the same volume. there's reflections. Probably I didn't have them stuffed enough. The ports were too small. So a lot of things were sort of like, oh, this looks about right. And it turns out about right is also about wrong. So it was not optimal. So there was ringing and general inefficiency. So there would be, like I said, the resonance was not correct. So you're damping the driver at its resonance, and so which you should do, but you're doing it, so not effectively. Just a number of problems. The Audax mid-range I had, and the Peerless titanium dome instead of the ribbon that Tim had used, but I used this similar mid-range, if not the same. It was I'm going to say like a 6-inch PA mid-range. Most of the music you hear is going to be mid-range, so having a really good mid-range for clarity is key, and that was a really good driver. So for an outside speaker, Audax, wonderful. So those were good. Bass response, not good. It's funny now. So the second pass was more interesting. We had everything at Harvey Mudd to build speakers. So had I waited, instead of doing it over the summer, I could have used our wood shop, which we made use of. So now on the other hand, if you're smart, you learn from your mistakes, which we did. So building the first set was pedagogically interesting, but it's still disappointing, but it was educational. So we had everything we needed at Mudd to build speakers and to design the crossovers. In fact, at some point I measured the crossover response with a frequency sweep signal analyzer. So pretty nerdy, but more learning, more practical. So my roommate Kevin and I took more wood. We got new sheets of wood. I don't even know whose pickup truck we borrowed to do this, but we got wood. We took it over to the wood shop and briefly, it was pretty quick. Instead of a circular saw, we had a real table saw. We were measuring twice, cutting once. Kevin was very precise, and we ended up with these ridiculously square, like as in really good cuts, really flush. Every piece matched. It was pretty good, actually. It was a much better construction phase than the first time because we weren't using a circular saw on the ground and so on. So good experience. And we still made 2 cabinets, but we split the volume internally with a extra panel. We still went with parallel walls because this was only the second design. So we had internal parallel walls, kind of golden ratio to cut down on all of the reflection. So we still had some reflection from parallel walls, but and then we packed a lot more stuffing into the volumes to disperse some of that reflection. So pretty good sound. The crossovers were good. They were 18 dB, so third order, bass, band, and high pass. And it sounded pretty good. So we plugged them in, and I have to say, like, order of magnitude better right out the gate. Like, oh, this is a vast improvement. The ports were correct. Did the math. We accounted for the difference in volume, having the internal mid-range and tweeter section in the top part. If I had it to do over again, I would probably split them, but it was convenient sometimes to be able to move them around as single units. But that was a proper entry into the outdoor speaker world, and it was fun times. When you can place your giant speakers outside, and because we were at the bottom of the U, we had a certain amount of waveguide action from the sides of the building, so directing our audio specifically at South Dorm, which was to the north of us. Yes, that's true. Off into the neighborhood behind them. Now, it's kind of interesting because South Dorm also U-shaped, but facing to the south. We were West Dorm facing to the north. So one time, a friend of mine was at the main, I think the Honnold Library, which was maybe a mile away, probably less, maybe a half mile, maybe call it 3/4 of a mile away. And he said, "Were you playing whatever the music was?" And he said, "Yeah, I could hear it very clearly." Now, the Honnold Library was behind us. It was to the south of West Storm. So not only was it on the other side of, however many feet of cinder block of the building itself, but it was 3/4 of a mile away. So the old inverse square law should really have cut that down. So if he was hearing whatever music we were playing quite clearly 3/4 of a mile away behind us, I have to imagine it was mostly from the reflection from South Dorm, which is still good. So you still get the inverse square law. So I would have to imagine we were comfortably up above. I think we never really measured. We probably should have. We had to be at least 120 dB at the or at the 1 meter point. 120, 115, 120, 118, 122, somewhere in there. That doesn't sound unreasonable. So that was good times. We did, though. This is one of those education that you don't learn in school things, except we were in school. We did have a policy, as did most people. All the people who got along with everybody said, "Hey, if you want us to turn this down, you just say so. You can call, or you can come down, or you can, whatever." So if we're playing music, it's too late or too early, or you got to study. If it's keeping you awake and you're whatever it is, just say the word. We're not even going to argue. And that was the general policy. Like, hey, can you turn it down? Absolutely. Down. So there was never, never is a strong word, but there was 99% of the time people were completely willing to yield the silence to people who needed to sleep or to do homework or to study or to do whatever. And this was much more important than our busy, tired nerd community would give value to the loud music. So, like, we love our loud music. We love our even Tom Sawyer blasting. All manner of music. But nerds. What was it? I think it was in fact Tim Radzik also who commented during an orientation exercise for the following, or maybe it was for my junior year, his senior year. He said, during the week, everybody's really, putting in crazy hours and we got a ton of work to do. So on Friday, it's good to just shoot hockey pucks, play loud music, do whatever, have some parties, do some, wander and do whatever you're doing, but it's not homework. And so this was something to make clear to incoming freshmen, like, don't burn yourself out. So do stop and have some fun every once in a while. So the loud music, the playing the music outside, especially speakers that you built yourself, was a good time. But it was absolutely not prioritized over health, I guess you could say. Like, hey guys, I gotta finish this final, a take-home final. Or I got to do a lab. I'm preparing for whatever it was. If you said, hey, can you turn down the music? Now, Friday afternoon, it would be a little bit tricky. Probably better to just go down to the library. But for the maybe 4-hour window on Friday afternoon, maybe 6 hours, the rest of the week, you pretty much ask anyone to turn down the music. Now, this is not true in the modern day apartment living, which I'll get to in a moment. So eventually, my senior year, I would move out of West Dorm, out to the new dorm, where I could have a bigger single than was in West. Single, that was just me, no roommates. And that was nice, change of pace after 3 years of 2.5 years with the same roommates of the 3. So the big speakers had their time. Rather than selling them, we cut them apart. In fact, I think we burned them in a finals, in a noisy minutes bonfire. And fun fact, burning a particle board is not great. A little formaldehyde, among other chemicals in there. But anyway, so I took out the drivers, of course, and I built a subwoofer, and I bought some bookshelf speakers that were, what were they? They were not Boston Acoustics. Maybe they were Boston Acoustics. They were nice. They were probably maybe 10 inches tall, mid-range tweeter, very nice sounding. And then I had my subwoofer. So I built this subwoofer out of 2 of the 12-inch woofers. They were facing together, separated by a wooden particle board panel. So I took another new sheet of wood down to the wood shop, and I created a little cube, and it was called a 7th order bandpass, and it's a combination. So it's one 12-inch driver on one side of a panel with a closed or sealed volume, and then the other side, so the speaker facing it, the other side is in a ported volume. So the push-pull configuration of the 12-inch woofers, one woofer in a sealed volume, one woofer in a ported volume, 7th order bandpass. So it has a natural frequency limitation, so you don't really have to cross over. And it sounded really good. I have to say, it sounded better than, well, for inside, it sounded better than the original use outside. So same 12-inch drivers, dual voice coil. So I basically connected, so each voice coil was connected to its sibling on the other side of the cabinet. And the cabinet was probably like 2 feet, almost cubical, whatever a good ratio would be to make it not a perfect cube. Internal panel, splitting the volumes, and then dual voice coil, so you could drive them. I didn't bridge them, so it wasn't like a mono subwoofer. Probably could have done that, but most bass is not stereo separated, so it really didn't matter too much. But I had each channel coming into the subwoofer, so that each pair of voice coils would drive from each channel and then push pull. So it worked out great. Like I said, I was happier, or it turned out better, I think, than the original or the second attempt at speakers. I did make the port too small. It was a slot, like a vent. So I made the port a little bit too small. So I wanted to try making the port bigger. So I experimented by instead of slicing the port and making it bigger, like 1/4 inch at a time along the whole length of it, I just cut out a section at one end of the port, and I hadn't glued down the top. So I basically stand on the top and to keep it down, otherwise it would vibrate. And I was kind of earballing it, like, okay, that sounds a lot better, that sounds about right, and okay, this is probably correct. Now, instead of cutting a new top and making a nice consistent slotted vent as a port, I just said, this is good, I'm not going to mess with it. So it had like an L-shaped port. It was a little odd, but it worked great. So I never even finished it. I never put a nice veneer of some sort, or it was particle board, so there's really no staining it or anything. But I had this for years, many years, and it was good. I enjoyed that experience. And if I was living in a house, which I've kind of given up on because I would rather travel than deal with a home, especially here in Vegas, where if you have a home that has not been broken into, that just means it's about to be broken into. So I'm not in favor of like, ooh, let me get a palatial estate and build speakers all day. But I wouldn't be against that. But I would totally experiment with different speakers and whatnot. It's fun. It's a fun hobby. It's not necessarily overwhelmingly expensive, and you can experiment with doing things with lower end drivers to get better sound quality, and you can do that with some the electronics, the crossover, and the signal that comes in, and how you massage it, you equalize, and so on. And then you can do some interesting things with porting, the non-parallel walls, the different transmission line ports internally. I worked at Jawbone later in my career, probably, I think it was 2010, 12, 11, somewhere in there. And I was working on the headsets, Jawbone headsets. I was building a quality control rig for manufacturing. So I was doing all the DSP that we'd learned in college, and the acoustic measurements and all that. So good times. And I was familiar with all this stuff thanks to these speakers. And I was speaking to this guy that was working on the Jam Box, if you ever remember the Jam Box. And I said, oh yes, I've built speakers. I know Thiel Small. And he's like, wait a minute, why aren't you doing the speaker group? And I said, I'm sitting right here. It's not like we don't have to move me around in the org chart. I can still talk about speakers all day. So we had a nice anechoic chamber. We had a turntable with a microphone. We had HATS units to do measurements. That was a good lab experience. It would have been fun at that time to build some speakers. But the take home was the Jam Box, for being so tiny, was actually using a passive radiator for a bass response. And it was pretty good. Like, I mean, it's not going to have the power that that a 12 or a 15 inch, fully driven, optimized, correctly ported, whatever, like you're not going to get quite that amount. You're not going to blow anybody's eardrums out or make their heart defibrillate. But as far as a tiny little package with not a lot of, let's just say when you're building volume, you don't want to go too high on the cost of parts, BOM cost. So for what they had internally, and it was all about porting and properly sealing and having the drivers oriented correctly and this bass reflex element and so on. So that kind of stuff is actually kind of fun because you are taking a challenge like, hey, how much response can we get out of this little tiny thing? And if you look today at earbud technology, at soundbar, especially now that you can have active room analysis, so you'll have a speaker that has a microphone in it. It will send out a test tone and get the response. There's just all kinds of fun stuff going on in the acoustics world, and it's a hobby that you can actually get into for not a lot of money. So I would not be anti speakers, but for the fact that I live in an apartment, and it turns out I am the only one who feels this way. But I just think that in an apartment context, thumping bass and blaring loud music is not totally cool, especially when people don't think about other people. They're like, hey, I live here, I'm going to play this music at 3 a.m, and no amount of noise complaints stops them. That's a different story for another time. But it turns out, though, so I discovered this. I graduated from college, went up to Silicon Valley, started working, had my speakers, everything was fine, and then you start to realize, like, So I used the bookshelf speakers as TV speakers. Right? I had a 27-inch Sony CRT for the kids. That's a tube, a big giant bottle of no air, cathode ray tube TV back in the day. So I had my big TV and I had my bookshelf speakers. I had the subwoofer, and I would make a little milk crate media center with some cinder block speaker stands. They were very solid. It was not practical, but it was like, it's kind of fun. I didn't have to spend money to build this. It was just parts, totally functional, very nerdy. But I was like, I don't really listen to music anymore. I'm really watching TV, or not, because I'm at work all the time. So once you entered the workaday world of Silicon Valley, and for context, I moved to Silicon Valley July of 1993. And if you check your calendar from back then, the dot-com boom basically started around then. Coincidence? Probably not. But the work days were becoming longer. There was more. I was surrounded by technology all the time. I would come home and not think, ooh, let me blast some music in this apartment. It was more like, I'm going to go outside and not work. And then when I'm home, maybe I'll watch some TV, but I'm mostly, my modem is dialing up. I'm hearing the connect tones, and that's still not needing the speakers. So I was not using the speakers so much over the years into the future. And then, of course, when I had my house fire in 2013, those speakers did not move with me to Vegas. So my days of the bookshelf, home-built subwoofer had come to an end. Nowadays, I have speakers sufficient to hear music. They're not the bookshelves that I had. They're not amazing. They're just sufficient. I have some headphones. I have some earbuds. I mostly listen to audiobooks if I'm at the gym or something. I mostly listen to music while I'm working if I'm not watching YouTube videos. So there's really no need in an apartment context to blast the music. So just as well. One of those things. I had my time. The physics and the engineering, though, of speakers, this was interesting. So I was in an electromagnetism and optics. So even though it's E&M, it's actually E&O, but we call it E&M. So E&M lab, and one of the basics in general, whether you're taking differential equations or basic electronics or basic physics E&M, you're going to learn about resistors, capacitors, and inductors, the RCL network. This is how you make crossovers. This is how you model analog systems, not only the real values, but you can use complex values. So you get your impedance and your compliance and your reactance, inductance, capacitance, resistance, all these different values you can plug into your imaginary numbers and get frequency responses and do your Bode plots and your root locus and all that, which I did. So it was fun to know how the speaker was working, and it works the way I thought it would. The math works. Hey, chalk one up for my predecessors. So being in the lab, I was able to like, oh yeah, this all makes sense, of course. So I did learn a lot of practical, applicable knowledge from building these speakers. The lab prof, I want to say it was Professor Chen. I think it was her first year there. She seemed to enjoy the fact that I was so into this, because I was like, hey, all this makes sense. It's so much fun when you're in a lab, oh, I got to take a lab class. But when the labs are actually applicable to things, or that you understand them already, right? So you're not like, oh, I don't know exactly why this is. I do know exactly why this is working. So practical learning coupled with different educational elements through school. So whether you're learning about Laplace transforms or Fourier transforms and Fourier response curves when you draw them on your equalizer. So those are really just Bode plots. So you're seeing your frequency response, you can get your phase response, you can do root locus, you can figure out where the pole should be, and all this stuff, all the things that we were learning in the classes for engineering, for physics, the math, the differential equations behind how you can model the elements of a RCL circuit, and then how that figures into op amps if you want to do an analog PID controller, or all these things. They all sort of fit together. So the building those speakers, not only a practical engineering experience in general, like, oh, our prototype was not good, let's go back to the drawing board and try again with version 2. Very educational there, but also the science, the physics, the engineering. Just something as simple as a transfer function that we learned in second semester of freshman year in systems engineering. At some level, it's just math. You're just multiplying G and F. T equals GF, G of S times F of S or whatever. And you're like, oh, okay, feedback, error signal, whatever. But then when you actually, and this is what E54 was for, so experimental engineering lab at Harvey Mudd, no longer taught. They've switched it to something else, probably easier. But doing a whole bunch of these lab classes, practical, hands-on, not mysterious, like, I don't know why this chemical reaction is happening, like everything you could see right in front of you. So to be able to have some sort of intuition from a hands-on learning, I got to do that a little bit earlier because of this interest, and because of people like Tim who are willing, probably mostly happy to help out with some suggestions, advice, and then gave me the nod on the second version. Oh yeah, these sound better. Yeah, cool. So any design of anything that involves resonance is the vibration you get when you hit the natural frequency of a system. So if you do a frequency sweep, if you have speakers in your home, you can do a test CD or something similar. So you frequency sweep, and there will be some point where things start to vibrate in the room. So that's the resonant frequency. It's where there's the least resistance in the system to that frequency. So understanding how system resonance works and what that really means and what to do about it in some cases was interesting. Again, more practical education, the way the Bode plot connects to reality. Bonus for classwork at the time, but also just generally, if you look at a microphone response, if you look at a speaker driver response curve over a frequency band, usually it's 20 to 20K. What is a notch filter at 60 hertz in a phone, in a copper wire phone circuit? Why do they do that? Oh, because you're going to pick up inductive coupling with the house electrical wiring. So you want to notch filter that. Oh, okay, I know it because I've built crossover networks with filters, and like, what's the roll off? What's F3? So very, very practical across a lot of disciplines to have that hands-on experience so early. It's an experience that I would have in other laboratory situations. So the class E54, like I said, E&M lab was much more like, to be honest, it was a little bit closer to high school physics, as in, we're not setting up particle accelerators or anything. So it's really practical learning about how lenses work and how momentum works on an air track. And did we do air track? I think we did. So E54 was much more, it was my chosen major, engineering. So E54 pushed the bounds a lot more because it was absolutely unexplored territory, whereas the chemistry and physics labs were a little bit more transitional from high school into college. If I was a chemistry major, I would have been doing organic chemistry labs. I would have been doing much more, really much more experimental chemistry. If I was in physics, same thing. So these were the required core curriculum. So nothing too exciting. But as far as engineering, having built the speakers, very educational, not only in the process, but also in the iteration, the measurement of like, ooh, this is not working. Let's figure out why. So yeah, entirely practical. And this was indeed my introduction to making, which would come into play through various parts of my career, but certainly when I joined Intel, which is not my favorite company, but I wish AMD would have been doing this stuff. When I joined Intel to be in the Maker Innovator Group, it didn't start out that way, and I don't know if that's the official name that they would use. I think they kind of iterated on the name a couple times, but it was basically MIG, Maker Innovator Group. And I got to go to maker fairs, and I got to go, which I had attended. I think it was the third maker fair in 2000, whichever year that was. Attended the maker fair in San Mateo. So I was like, oh yeah, this is pretty cool. So to be in the Maker Innovator Group at Intel, which was a sponsor of Maker Fair, to go to the maker fairs, to go all the hackathons, to interact with young people that were into the making notion, it arguably started with these speakers that I built because, hey, I want to build speakers. I got to learn how speakers work because I haven't done the math. I haven't done the classwork. The math was not so hard, but understanding the practicality of the math. What does it mean? What is the response? What is this 18 dB, 6 dB per octave? What is 18 dB? What does that mean? What does it actually mean? What does it mean to calculate that? How do I even know if it's correct for what I'm doing? So the practicalities would come later in general, but sooner because I actually did the practicalities. I actually implemented it. So I made a thing as part of my own education. So I've quoted Diana from our America's Greatest Makers show, our reality TV program that we did on TBS, so you didn't see it. The paraphrase, because nobody seems to have written down what she said, and even she didn't remember precisely. But what is a maker? A maker is someone who learns what they need to learn to make what they want to make. So it was something like that. And so I would say the speakers were the most obvious kind of first challenge. Now, we could argue that some of my chicanery that I got up to with computers in high school, the digital pager thing, some other hackery, but that was not practical. That was not an actual learning experience. Those were more just messing around. The freak phone and all that stuff. So building those speakers was actually, I would say, a legitimate maker undertaking with some success, and certainly success in the outcome, but also success in the lasting impact over the years since. And I probably got lucky because the second version of our outdoor speakers turned out really well. Had we said, oh, let's try a split cabinet design, or we could have gone for version 3 or 4, probably would have been even better, but who knows? They served their purpose. And then of course my 7th order bandpass subwoofer enclosure had many more years, at least 10, maybe 20. I mean, I didn't use it all the time as the years went by, but many, many years of use and not taking full advantage of having a subwoofer, but it still came in handy. It was fun to have, and the fact that it worked so well, maybe that was my version 3. But yeah, so speaker building turned out to be a nice combination of art, which I'm not good at. They were not aesthetically pleasing, but most definitely science with a practical feedback loop, so you can actually, quite literally, hear the difference. And so really good times. And then again, like I said, living in an apartment now, maybe it's because we lived in this context of, hey, if you need me to turn this down, just say the word. Nobody was trying to prove anything. Nobody was pulling the old, well, I pay rent too, so I should be able to play whatever music, really, you have to go buy a home or live out in a field some van life. Put your speakers outside your van in the middle of nowhere. And by the way, that's you won't get the same. If you have completely free space, it will sound a little bit different than if you have building walls around you. Anyway, you can learn that for yourself. But in apartment context, I think this was one of the take-home lessons for me, was that, you just don't blast music because you are sharing walls with people. And it's just common courtesy. And it turns out not common courtesy. But that's also another episode for another time. But anyway, that's my speaker building adventure. I'm really glad I took the opportunity at the time when the resources were there, when there was an environment to kind of let loose and see, like, how loud can these really go, and to have some fun doing it. We had some fun times. We would have parties, 5 college parties, these giant, probably we moved the speakers in then, but people with outdoor speakers upstairs would blast music for these parties. And, so it was a part of a fun having process that was not sitting in a classroom or in a library or at your desk trying to do homework, but more, hey, I built these and they work. So a win on several levels. And that is where I will leave it for today, Wednesday, May 29th, 2024, those home-built speakers. I recommend building speakers for anyone, and then see what a pain it is if you don't know what you're doing. That speaker design cookbook, I think there is a latest version still in print somewhere, or you can track down similar books. But there are some basics to know. There are some, over the years, people have learned more about reflections and non-parallel walls and transmission line enclosures, porting. I think it's transmission line. Transmission line is basically a waveguide. So waveguide, transmission line, however they describe long internal winding ports. There have been some amazing, ridiculously expensive speaker cabinets sold over the years. And when you look inside of them, you're like, Infinity. Infinity was I think I had Infinity bookshelf speakers, not Bose. And my friend had the Infinity 15-inch. Yeah, Infinity. I don't even know if they're still around. But when you look inside these things, you realize they're just some dimensions and some calculations and some electronic components. The driver is still, the transducer is what you really have to be concerned about. You get a good transducer with a good surround. You really want infinite stiffness, but zero mass. So as close as you can get to those for a nice bass response. It's fun because you can, almost like cooking, right? You can really get a sense of whether that was better or worse than last time. And you iterate. And so it's really good. If anyone has young people around them that are into building things, speakers are fun. It's better than a drum set. Because you can turn them off. Anyway, that's where I'll leave it for today. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to check out buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo, ko-fi.com/DanHugo, ko-fi.com/DanHugo. If at some point, sometime soon, I get the many projects that are in flight to settle down and get websites posted and start publishing my content to my own properties as the primary point of publication, Spotify and the others will not go away, but I would really like to own my content online, and it's part of an ongoing collection of projects that all kind of depend on each other. So there will be forthcoming episodes about all of this, but watch that space, find the various things I'm working on, and thank you for listening. Take care.